Maxwell's News. Today I'll be presenting Liberia, its freedom, its order, and most importantly, its equality. So, first of all, how dependent or independent is Liberia? Well, as we know, in 2011, the first female president in Africa was elected, and she was obviously Liberian. Now, to support her was the American government. So I guess that can tell us just how good Liberia is and how independent, but also how dependent they may be from big countries such as the US. Now, they are mostly dependent of the US just probably for their own safety, because in terms of production and food, etc., they do have a lot of production. They have almost a quarter, 25% of their own agriculture going towards other countries. We were able to speak to some peacekeepers from the UN that are in Liberia. Now, they've only just arrived about 2 years ago, so they really haven't had much to do yet. But they did say that they did see a change from the time at which they were here during the Civil War and now at a time of peace. Now, hopefully, their stay will not be something in vain, because obviously moving 500 troops to such a small country is something that will cost the UN a lot of money. So now, to talk about politics in Liberia, well, it's pretty simple. For the last 14 years, Liberia had been undergoing a civil war. And for the first time in 2011, Liberia had their first democratic election. Now, in terms of how much people can express their opinions, well, not very much yet. The press has been really pressured throughout the last couple of years, but I think that now, thanks to the new president, they will probably be able to express their opinions and help the public know more about all the problems that they undergo each day. So, individual freedom. Now in Liberia, that is a subject that, well, is pretty much a taboo subject. Now why? Well, probably because they have a large amount of females getting genital mutilation. So FGM. Now, we all know that Liberia has the first woman president, President Sirleaf, which is also won a Nobel Prize for women's rights, for being a women's rights activist. Now, she hasn't done anything yet on the subject, but well, we can't blame her. She hasn't been in her spot for a very long time. Now, when it comes to female genital mutilation, Liberia has a lot of problems with it because a lot of people, well, a lot of women are getting, well, how could I put this? A lot of women in Liberia are being affected by FGM. Now, either they know someone or it has even happened to them. But it is something typical in Liberia. As an example, women that are getting ready to marry a man will generally go on these sort of tours in camps. And well, generally, it's not like a typical bachelor party in Europe or the US. They generally end up being mutilated and then, well, get married. Now FGM is a big problem as well, because women can die from it. They can die from bleeding. Now, that's not the only thing. Generally, people over there will cut it with razors that aren't even sterilized. And then, well, they catch an infection in a very horrible place. The Liberian government has decided to try and ban this custom. Now, they know it is a custom, but it's not one they would like to keep. They are one of the 27 countries in Africa where this custom is present. And in 3 to 4 years, they hope to officially ban it and never hear from it again. Now, Liberia also has its economy, like every other country. Liberia's economy is in very deep trouble. Well, simply because the Civil War Sirleaf hopes that many investors will be soon to come to the country and hopefully provide for help and hopefully help them gain back their country's sustainable economy. Now, law and order in Liberia, does it really work? How well does it work? Well, one of the UN peacekeepers has recently told us that due to weak infrastructure, poverty, and unemployment, even though Liberia is a very calm and peaceful place ever since the last day of the actual war, they do have a lot of problems concerning criminality and the respect of the laws that they have imposed. Now, we can't only put the guilt on the population of Liberia. The police officers really do lack confidence and don't really respond well when crimes arrive. Now, one of the other problems is that if people do not trust the police officers, then how are their laws ever going to be respected? How are the people ever going to be able to exchange? And how are the police officers ever going to be able to help people if people fear them? They are not supposed to put fear. They're mostly supposed to maintain peace and serenity. Now, the police do lack confidence, but ever since the end of the Civil War 10 years ago, they have been doing a lot to help the police forces, the LNP, the National Force, the National Police. Now, they have over twice the size of men that the Army has. Now, you can imagine that is probably a great thing regarding security. But the only problem is corruption. Now, yes, if you have a police force that is twice as big as the Army's and corrupt, well, you are effed. Lack of money also leads to this corruption because the cops, or the police, however you want to call them, do not get the firearms that they need to be able to battle off whatever crimes happen at night in Liberia. Obviously, they probably don't get paid as much as they should because the country's economic stability is still low. Now, obviously, they will want to go to some place where they can gain more money than they make. But the government is trying to make more efforts and pay them more and actually get the equipment that they need to be able to battle the forces. So we know that crime in Liberia is a major factor. But ever since those 500 UN peacekeeping troops have arrived, we can feel that there's a sort of tension in the streets because people know that there's someone watching them. Someone other than the police, which is corrupt and non-trustworthy. Now, this might be bad or good, but probably good, because this maintains peace in a way that the police officers cannot. Now, obviously, order can't be maintained if you don't have the resources to maintain it. Now, when President Sirleaf was elected, we had a reporter go over there. And, well, she did tell us that the buildings were in such bad shape due to the war that they had to host a ceremony in a public area, plastic white chairs, and coconuts on the floor. Now, if you ask me, I think that the President Sirleaf should be given some time before being able to maintain order. Because after all, if the buildings haven't even been rebuilt after 14 years, well, it's saying that order isn't ready to be maintained yet. Do you think that works? The other big problem is that Liberia's roads are completely destroyed, as well as their electric cables, the telephone cables, and even the water pipes have been broken. To what extent is order balanced with freedom in Liberia? Well, honestly, I don't think they are able to associate these two very well. To prove this, one of our Liberian journalist friends was incarcerated for publishing something on corruption in Liberia. Now, the punishment was pretty severe, if you ask me. 5,000 years in prison and $1.6 million to the government. He very well knew that he wasn't going to live up to those 5,000 years or even ever finally get 1.6 million to just be able to spend on a little, mistake he made. Now, right here we have the whole report, and it is actually quite interesting because he had actually gotten 2 illnesses while incarcerated in the Monrovia prison: pneumonia and malaria. Those aren't the typical illnesses you would expect in Europe or the US, but in Africa, pretty damn typical. Now, also the conditions in which he was were probably terrible, because he was in a prison that was made for 350 people, and he had about 1,100 other cellmates, so to speak. This prison was overpopulated by... It was incredible. They really had no space at all, no privacy. He had been incarcerated for something that in any other country, or any other democratic country as well as Liberia, one is allowed to do: express an opinion or do a report on something that you find interesting, or maybe that the population finds interesting. But this man wasn't given justice. He was just sent to prison for something that the government thought was wrong. Now, perhaps they did it because they didn't like the fact that he was talking about corruption, because they didn't want bad publicity. But it was probably because they knew that he was telling the truth, and that people could read and know about the truth and not be lied to. That is the story of our friend. He is still in prison to this day, and, well, unfortunately for him, he will never get out. Or probably not until the UN might step in. Thank you. So, freedom from fear. Now, Liberia does actually have a lot to do with this. They haven't known a single year of peace in the last 20 years. Either it was riots, civil wars. They do have a lot to fear. And because of all these problems in the last 2 decades, corruption aroused, as well as poverty, unemployment, and now the UN stepped in. They even were able to sign a peace treaty with Ghana. But for such a country as Liberia to maintain peace for a long time might not be possible. Perhaps it will collapse again and again and never gain back on its feet. And never get back on its feet. Now, inequality of opportunity, inequality of outcome. Liberia is very highly unemployed. We also have the difference in equality with the FMG problem amongst women, and no such things exist in the male population of Liberia. Now, we can also see that amongst all the warlords present in Liberia, so we know that crime in Liberia is a major factor. But ever since those 500 UN peacekeeping troops have arrived, we can feel that there's a sort of tension in the streets, because people know that there's someone watching them. Someone other than the police, which is corrupt and non-trustworthy. Now, this might be bad or good, but probably good, because this maintains peace in a way that the police officers cannot. In Liberia, there was a society that lived long times and long periods with no government at all. They had no laws to follow and were basically all equal because they each had no laws to follow. The equality at those times was pretty much equal. Now, ever since the arrival of the new president, there has been changes, but there are still a couple laws that still haven't been established, and, well, the equality is still pretty much the same, except once again with FMG, that is only present amongst women. There's also a sort of contradiction here, because we can obviously see that women are not as important in the Liberian society as men. However, Liberia has a female president. So, freedom from want. We know that there are high unemployment rates in Liberia, which means that there's not a lot of money in Liberian pockets. So, the UN is forced to help them. Well, not forced, but they help them and have to give them food. So in a way, the Liberians are very, very restricted. They don't want or get what they want because they simply just can't. They don't have the money or the resources, in effect. The unemployment is so high that there's really no wants. There's only needs, such as water and foods and just a bath a day. Well, thank you for watching Axel News, or Double G News for the real G's. Now, thank you very much, and see you next time. Next week's edition on Liechtenstein.
Yo.